Let's talk about old fighting games. Fighting games are a genre of games that's been around for nearly as long as video games themselves have. When games were first being developed, one of the first thoughts that the developers had was, okay, but can I beat the snot out of the other player without having to throw hands in the real world? And because of this thought process, we ended up getting machines where you would slam on them as hard as you could in order to get different attacks in a little-known game titled Street Fighter 1. Since then, fighting games have slowly but surely evolved as years and years passed, and now there's a generation of fighting game players who weren't born when the original Street Fighter came out. Hell, there's probably a generation whose parents weren't born when Street Fighter 1 came out. I wasn't even born when Street Fighter 3 came out. I still dived headfirst into the community without looking back. Since a lot of players have joined the community thanks to newer games, they tend to know very little about the games that came before the ones that they play today. There are unironically Strive players out there who don't know who Johnny is, and if you ask me, that means that I failed my duty as a content creator and I'll be committing seppuku at the earliest possible convenience. As some of you may know right now, the modern fighting game player is in a bit of a weird limbo state. As Street Fighter 6 is just around the corner, Tekken 8 is somewhere near off in the future, and Guilty Gear Strive isn't working. So a lot of people who enjoy these games are kind of just waiting to be able to play them again. So what do you do while you wait? What do you do if you feel the urge to play a fighting game, but none of the current offerings really tickle your fancy? Well, there's always the back alley. There's always those games you have to search the depths of hell in order to find matches in. The games where you have to embark on a mighty quest to find the one person in your region that's not got a fucking sleep schedule and is down to play. You could play an old game. Now, there's a lot of fighting games out there, so we need to figure out what we actually mean by the word old. Now, this can get a little tricky because it really depends on where you're looking from. I would personally class something like Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 as an old game for the simple reason of it hasn't been updated in years and the sequel to the game has been out for a while now. However, if we were to use that logic, we'd have to say something like Tekken 7 is an old game, as it was released around the same time as the original version of Xrd was. But it's still getting patched and is being played competitively to this day on pretty broad scales, so what's the criteria for an old game then? Well, it probably does depend on the person. We could all probably agree that something like Street Fighter 3 First Strike is an old game at this point. However, once we get to things like Street Fighter 5, it might be a bit awkward for you to draw the line. I will make some of you in the audience feel old as fuck at this point though. Street Fighter 4 is an old game because it originally came out in 2008. I was 8 years old when Street Fighter 4 came out. I'm now 23. However, for the sake of games that I want to talk about, I will be saying that a fighting game classes as old if the game is over 5 years old or a new entry in the series has been released, the developers have ceased updating the game, and finally, the majority of people playing it aren't using the official matchmaking system in order to get reliable matches. The last one is probably the most important one, as there's still games on the market where you can officially play them through their original ranked and casual matchmaking systems. However, there comes a time where their matchmaking systems just kind of stop working, or maybe they never worked to begin with. So players need to use other methods to find games, like hopping between the same free player lobbies that always manage to be open at weird times, or using external methods like the reliable carrier pigeon, or the extremely not reliable Discord servers. This way, games like Street Fighter 5 and Tekken 7 still class as modern fighting games even though their age is starting to show. The FGC is a little bit weird like that. Sometimes games just last an entire decade, and then you have games like BB Tag that were dead on arrival. And even then, according to this criteria, BB Tag isn't considered old because 2.0 came out in 2019. So just take it with a grain of salt, but trust me when I say I've personally found an old game that matches the criteria that I'm going to be learning over the course of the next month. Maybe, we'll have to see how good that Street Fighter 6 demo is. But first, we should go over some of the things you as a player should look out for in old games, so you have the best chance of actually playing them, as well as figuring out stuff you may want to avoid. Now, let's start with the most important thing that, in my opinion, should be the thing that you look for in old games, and that is a stable netplay experience, with the most important thing being, of course, rollback netcode. In recent years, there's been a large amount of community efforts in order to try and get rollback netcode into a bunch of old games that were stuck for years with shitty delay-based netcode. With the mass adoption of rollback netcode, a lot of developers have found ways to implement it back into their old games by either doing it themselves or officially hiring the people already working on the community effort and giving them an actual budget for it. Alternatively, there are third-party applications like Fightcade that allow you to emulate old games as if they were running on their original hardware, with the added benefit that the online has rollback netcode. I will say that there's currently a bit of a gray area for some games that came out on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 era with rollback implementation. Games like Street Fighter 3 and Marvel vs. Capcom 2 both have rollback netcode through Fightcade, meaning that you can play these games with anyone around the world. However, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Ultra Street Fighter 4 are unfortunately stuck in delay-based hell, meaning the community has to find ways to be able to play these games online without the game absolutely collapsing in on itself. This is generally by playing through Parsec, which allows you to connect to an external server or to one of the player's computers to play through that. It's basically delay-based netcode, but it's much more optimized. However, I am more than certain that there are efforts by fans to try and get rollback netcode into these games. It's really weird how modern games and the last generation of fighting games all generally have pretty good netcode, then it becomes really shit and it goes back to really good netcode again. Give it a few years though and basically every game will have rollback, trust me. There's no point in trying to learn an old game though if there's nothing out there to help you get into it. So the next thing you should be looking out for is good learning resources. There are a bunch of different ways to learn how to play fighting games. You can follow specifically made tutorials by the developers or by players of the game. You can watch pro players play the characters that you like and try to imitate them. You can scroll through wiki pages looking for optimal combos and setups, or you can do the most common thing, which is get into matches and get your shit kicked in. All fighting games have the benefit of being around for so long that players have found a bunch of different things for every character in the game, and they generally have a good idea of what each character is capable of and what their game plan should be. It's very common for players to share all of this knowledge online with newer players who are picking up their character. But when you're starting out, trying to figure out where to start with information can be a daunting task to say the least. Sites like Dustloop, Mizumi, and Supercombo.gg all have extensive lists and stats of different characters for different games, so you'll be able to find a bunch of basic game plans for your character, as well as more advanced things to learn, and even pro players of that character to keep an eye on. These wikis have made these games much more accessible. Knowledge is power, so giving the knowledge to newbies without forcing them to deal with the vets that refuse to tell them about the knowledge check is a great way to even the playing field. But what's the point of recommending you to do this if I don't take my own advice? It's all good for me to sit there and say, you should go and play old games because blah blah blah. Why don't you do it, huh? Why don't you lead by example? Well, alright then, I'll do it. From now until the end of May, I will do my best to try and learn an older game and try to compete in a tournament at a decent level, and most importantly, I'll try to have fun while doing it. But what game should I play? What would be good? If only there was an anime fighter that I've always wanted to learn and try to get into, but due to varied circumstances, I've never had the time, the energy, or the people around to be able to learn the game, but I've always had my eye on it. And now, in the time between new releases of major titles and Guilty Gear Strive currently being basically unplayable, I finally have the time to be able to do something that I've always wanted to do as a kid. I am going to learn how to play BlazBlue. Cross Tag Battle. No, I'm kidding. It's Central Fiction. It's Central Fiction. It's not BB Tag. Don't worry. That's right. I am going to be learning how to play BlazBlue Central Fiction. Well, more accurately, I have been learning how to play Central Fiction. There isn't any major goals attached to this, however. I just want to be able to join a Salty EU bracket and see how far I can get with just a few sessions of experience. If you would like to see my journey, I am streaming view matches over on my Twitch right now, so you can show me a thing or two about the game and watch me as I fail to do basic Ragnar combos. I'll hopefully be streaming my tournament run this Tuesday as well, as Capcom has decided to just give us a demo and not an actual beta. Jesus fucking Christ, Capcom. I want to play Ken. I don't want to play fucking Ryu and Luke, but okay. And if you're not live stream pilled, then make sure to subscribe, as I'll be doing a follow-up video to this in a few weeks. Apart from that, thanks for watching, and I hope that you found an old game that you're interested in. As always, a very special thanks to 64MHz, Almost Nap Time, Bantu Shitos, Brudikai, Cervantes de Leon, Daniel Wiedericht, Dragonprox, Games.png, I Am Naoto, Lady Dantalon, Melodically Me, Monact, Enhoa, Ray W, Super, Forcon, Tom Tanks, and Zandatsu for being Tier 2 patron supporters.